Look, I'm honestly just so exhausted by people who have literally nothing better to do than wave a cheap Amazon decibel meter at a sleeping senior dog. I mean, this is exactly the kind of unhinged, petty suburban headache that made me start sovereign justice in the first place, because some folks just beg to be legally humbled. Let's just dive right into it. I want you to picture the most stereotypical, humid, suffocatingly bright Tuesday morning in Boca Raton, Florida. The kind of morning where the air feels like warm soup and the palm trees look like they're sweating. Now, picture my front porch. It's a nice porch. Travertine tiles. A couple of tasteful, legally mandated by the HOA ferns. And right in the middle of it, lying on a cooling mat that cost me entirely too much money, is Barnaby. Barnaby is a 12-year-old English bulldog. If you know anything about English bulldogs, you know that at 12 years old, they are essentially just sentient sacks of pudding held together by stubbornness and a fierce devotion to naps. Barnaby does not bark. Barnaby does not run. Barnaby's primary method of interacting with the world is existing heavily in whatever patch of shade he can find. Oh, and yes, because he has the nasal structure of a squished baked potato, he breathes loud. It's a rhythmic, wet, fluttery kind of snoring. To me, it's white noise. It's peaceful. To Brenda, it was apparently a war crime. It's an auditory assault. That was Brenda. She was standing at the edge of my manicured lawn, practically vibrating out of her Lululemon leggings. Brenda was the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, a title she treated with the same solemn gravity as the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Standing next to her, looking like they would rather be literally anywhere else on planet Earth, were two Boca Raton police officers. The taller one, Officer Higgins, his name tag was slightly crooked, which felt like a massive aesthetic violation in this neighborhood, was staring at Barnaby. Barnaby was fast asleep, and a tiny bubble of drool was inflating and deflating rhythmically on his lower lip. Snork, pft, snork, pft. "Ma'am," Officer Higgins said, his voice dripping with the kind of profound weariness you only get from dealing with Boca residents for 10 years. "It's a dog. It's breathing. It is not a crime to be alive." "It's violating the municipal noise ordinance," Brenda shrieked, stabbing a manicured finger toward the sleeping puddle of wrinkles. In her other hand, she was clutching a black plastic device that looked like a 1990s stud finder. "I measured it! He's hitting 60 decibels! My morning vinyasa flow is completely ruined! Ruined, Jake!" I leaned against my doorframe, holding my mug of black coffee, just taking it all in. "Brenda, you live 3 houses down," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. If you can hear an elderly bulldog breathing over the sound of your own entitlement, you need to be studied by science." "Don't you get smart with me?" she snapped, marching one step onto my driveway before seemingly remembering that stepping on my property without 24 hours written notice was an HOA violation she herself had penned. She stopped, teetering on the edge of the pristine concrete. "I am fining him, $100 a day for excessive biological noise. Officers, I want an incident report filed." The second cop, a rookie who still had hope in his eyes, sighed so deeply his tactical vest shifted. "We aren't filing a police report on a snoring dog, Mrs. Vance. We have actual crimes to attend to, like literally anything else." They turned to leave, walking back to their cruiser with the slow and deliberate pace of men escaping a hostage situation. Brenda watched them go, her mouth hanging open in absolute outrage. When the cruiser pulled away, she whipped her head back toward me. Her eyes were narrowed to tiny, furious slits. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. I think Barnaby's drool bubble is funny, I replied, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I think you calling the cops on a sleeping animal is just deeply sad. Brenda reached into the pocket of her pristine white athletic jacket and pulled out a laminated pink slip of paper. She didn't hand it to me. She aggressively slid it across the travertine tiles of my porch, like a high-stakes poker dealer sliding a losing card. "Cease and desist, Jake," she sneered. "Section 4A of the Whispering Pines Covenant. You have 48 hours to mitigate the nuisance, or the HOA board will vote to have the animal impounded." She turned on her heel and marched away, her blonde ponytail swinging with militant precision. I looked down at the pink slip. Then I looked at Barnaby. He shifted his weight, let out a massive, rumbling fart, and continued sleeping. "Impounded?" I whispered to myself. A very specific, very cold kind of anger settled into my chest. You can mess with my lawn. You can complain about the exact shade of beige I painted my mailbox. But you do not threaten my dog. Not Barnaby, not the dog that sat by my feet while I coded my way through college, the dog that got me through my 20s, the dog who literally just wants to sleep his final years away in the Florida sun. I picked up the pink slip. It wasn't a joke. It was officially stamped by the HOA board. She was actually going to try and take my dog over his breathing. Right then and there, the software developer in me, the guy who spent his entire professional life looking for bugs, exploiting systems, and finding the back doors in complex codes, woke up. The Whispering Pines. A covenant wasn't a holy text. It was just a set of rules, and every set of rules has a bug. I just had to find it. The escalation happened faster than I could have anticipated. By Thursday, Brenda wasn't just threatening. She was executing a coordinated neighborhood siege. I woke up at 7 a.m. to grab my newspaper and found her HOA minions stationed on the public sidewalk. There was Gary from number 42, a retired dentist who treated his lawn with a pair of surgical tweezers, holding an iPad up to record my front porch. Next to him was Susan from number 18, aggressively taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "Morning, Gary," I called out, scratching my head. "Taking up filmography in your twilight years?" "Documenting the decibel violations, Jake," Gary said stiffly, not lowering the iPad. "The board requires empirical evidence." "He's snoring right now," Susan gasped, pointing her pen at Barnaby, who was safely inside behind the screen door, doing his usual morning wheeze. "Write down the time, Gary. 7:04 a.m. Unbelievable disruption." I shut the front door, locked it, and walked straight to my home office. I fired up my dual monitors. On the left screen, I pulled up the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association Master Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. All 400 pages of it. On the right screen, I pulled up a fresh blank text document. Plus, I spent the next 14 hours reading. I didn't eat. I barely blinked. I read through zoning regulations about fence heights, hyper-specific clauses regarding the exact species of approved shrubbery, and absurd mandates about the allowable duration a garage door could remain open. 15 minutes, apparently. And there it was. Section 4A. Brenda wasn't lying. It explicitly banned excessive biological noise, including but not limited to chronic barking, squawking, shrieking, or mechanical-sounding respiratory functions from non-human occupants. She had literally amended the bylaws 3 years ago to include mechanical-sounding respiratory functions, just to target Barnaby. The pettiness was almost artistic, but you can't write a 400-page document without contradicting yourself. It's statistically impossible. I kept digging. I read through the sections on architectural modifications, guest parking, and holiday decorations. Then, at 11:45 p.m., my eyes burning and my brain turning to mush, I found it. Section 9B, the Home-Based Business Protection Clause. I leaned forward in my ergonomic mesh chair, my heart rate spiking. 5 years ago, Brenda had gotten heavily involved in a multi-level marketing scheme selling some sort of aggressively scented essential oils. Her garage had become a literal warehouse. Neighbors had complained about the constant delivery trucks and the eye-watering smell of lavender and eucalyptus choking the cul-de-sac. To protect her little pyramid scheme, Brenda had used her presidential power to ramrod Section 9B into the bylaws. I read it out loud to the empty room. The association shall levy no fines, restrictions, or impoundment threats against registered home-based businesses, their inventory, or their commercial assets, provided said business operates under a valid state or federal license and does not violate state or federal law. Commercial assets are strictly exempt from residential nuisance clauses. I sat back, staring at the glowing screen. Barnaby shuffled into the office, his toenails clicking against the hardwood floor. He collapsed onto my feet with a heavy sigh and immediately began to snore. Commercial assets are strictly exempt from residential nuisance clauses. Brenda had created a blanket immunity shield for herself. But laws are blind, and bylaws don't care who uses them. If I had a registered business, my assets were untouchable. But I couldn't just register Barnaby as a business asset. He's a dog. The USDA and the IRS have very strict definitions of what constitutes a working animal. An elderly bulldog who sleeps 20 hours a day wasn't going to pass an audit. No, if I was going to use Section 9B to nuke Brenda's little dictatorship from orbit, I needed a real business. I needed a real federal license. And I needed an asset that was so obnoxiously, undeniably loud that Barnaby's breathing would sound like a gentle spring breeze in comparison. I opened a new tab on my browser and typed in a phrase I never, in a million years, thought I would ever search. How to legally acquire a tiger. I mean, you literally cannot make this stuff up. The first thing you learn when you fall down the rabbit hole of federal animal regulation at 1 a.m. is that the government is actually weirdly okay with you housing a literal apex predator as long as you fill out the right paperwork and pay the fee. Honestly, the HOA covenant explicitly banned exotic and non-domesticated pets. The key word there, the beautiful gleaming loophole sitting right in the middle of Brenda's meticulously crafted legal cage, was the word pets. Section 4. Banned pets. Section 9B protected commercial assets. If I bought a tiger because I thought it was cute, I was in violation. If I acquired a tiger as the primary physical asset of a registered educational corporation, I was a small business owner contributing to the American economy. The next morning, I didn't even bother making coffee before I called the USDA, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. "Hey, Fachis, this is Greg," a voice answered, sounding like he was chewing on a dry bagel and a lifetime of regrets. "Hey, Greg. I'm calling to inquire about the application process for a Class C exhibitor's license under the Animal Welfare Act," I said, putting him on speakerphone while I aggressively scrambled some eggs for Barnaby. "I need to establish a home-based educational exhibit." Greg stopped chewing. "A Class C? Sir, you understand that's for exhibiting exotic or wild animals to the public, right? It's not for getting a weird lizard for your kid." "I am fully aware, Greg. I am, honestly incredibly passionate about feline conservation education. Specifically, large felines. I'm registering an LLC today. Sovereign Feline Education. Yes, we are going to specialize in on-site demonstrations regarding the vocalizations and behavioral patterns of Panthera tigris. There was a very long, very heavy silence on the other end of the line. You want to put a tiger in your house? No, Greg. That would be illegal and frankly irresponsible, I said, leaning against the counter. I want to house a federally regulated commercial asset in a USDA-compliant, Category 3 structural enclosure on my commercially zoned, via H, OA loophole property, for education. Sir, the application is APHIS Form 7011. There's an application fee, an annual license fee, a mandatory background check, and you have to have a pre-licensing inspection of the facility by one of our veterinary medical officers. You have to have a program of veterinary care, a written itinerary, and an environmental enrichment plan. It's a lot of paperwork. Literally, people give up halfway through. Greg, buddy, I smiled, watching Barnaby wheeze softly into his scrambled eggs. I am a software engineer fighting a Boca Raton HOA. I eat paperwork for breakfast. Send me the PDF. By noon, I had legally formed Sovereign Feline Education LLC with the state of Florida. By 3 o'clock, I had drafted a completely unhinged but legally binding 60-page business plan detailing my community outreach and feline awareness curriculum. But here's the thing about getting a tiger. You don't just go to a tiger store, you have to find one. I spent the next 3 days calling every big cat rescue and accredited sanctuary in the state of Florida, which, honestly, has way more tigers than you'd think. Most of them hung up on me. Finally, I got a hold of a sanctuary director up near Ocala named Marcus. Look, man, Marcus said, his voice crackling over a bad cell connection. I don't adopt out to private individuals. I run a legitimate rescue. We take cats from failed roadside zoos and idiots who watched too much Netflix. I totally get that, Marcus. I respect the hell out of it, I said, pacing my home office. But I'm not a private individual looking for a pet. I am the CEO of Sovereign Feline Education, LLC. I'm currently finalizing my USDA Class C permit. I have the capital to build whatever enclosure you require, to your exact specifications. And I hear you guys are overcrowded because of that seizure up in the Panhandle last month. Marcus sighed. It was the sigh of a man who was out of money, out of space, and out of options. We have a female. Bengal. 7 years old. Name is Princess Buttercup. She was surrendered by some guy who tried to keep her in a chain-link dog run. She's loud, like very vocal, and she's stressed because of the overcrowding here. We need a temporary foster placement for about 6 months while we build out our new north wing. Marcus, I said, a slow, malicious grin spreading across my face. You had me at loud. If you can get the Class C, and if your enclosure passes my inspection and the USDA inspection, we can write up a 6-month commercial lease agreement. But you're paying for all her food, veterinary care, and insurance. Literally not a problem. Send me the enclosure blueprints. That was the easy part. The hard part was contractor Mike. Mike was a local guy. Good reviews on Yelp, specialized in custom pergolas, outdoor kitchens, and high-end pool cages. When he pulled his F-150 into my driveway a week later, I handed him a rolled-up set of architectural blueprints I'd had expedited by a structural engineer. Mike unrolled them on the hood of his truck. He took off his sunglasses. He put them back on. He took them off again, squinting at the paper in the blinding Florida sun. Jake, buddy, Mike said, pointing a calloused finger at the schematic.
This is 12-foot-high, 9-gauge galvanized steel chain link. It specifies a continuous roof of the same material. It requires 3-foot-deep concrete footers with steel rebar reinforcement. And what is this here? That's the containment vestibule, Mike, I explained casually. A double-door system. You enter the first door, it locks behind you, and only then can you open the second door to enter the primary enclosure. Standard safety protocol. Mike stared at me. Honestly, man, what are you building? Are you keeping a T-Rex back here? Is this for a cartel thing? Because I don't do cartel things. It's just for a rescue cat, Mike. She likes to jump, and I guess she scratches a bit. Can you build it or not? He looked at the blueprints, then looked at my very normal, extremely boring backyard. I mean, yeah, I can build it. It's going to take 2 weeks, and it's going to take a literal cement mixer driving into your cul-de-sac. The HOA is going to lose their minds. Let me worry about the HOA, Mike. Just pour the concrete. The construction phase was, without exaggeration, a masterpiece of suburban psychological warfare. On the first day the heavy machinery rolled into the Whispering Pines subdivision, Brenda was at my property line in exactly 8 minutes flat. She didn't even walk. She speed-walked with an aggressive arm pump, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. The sound of the concrete mixer, a deep, grinding roar, echoed off the identical stucco houses. "Jake!" Brenda screamed over the noise, her face redder than a Florida sunburn. "What is this? You didn't submit an architectural modification request to the board. This is an unauthorized structure. I am calling a halt to this project immediately. You cannot pour concrete without HOA approval." I was leaning against a stack of steel beams, sipping from a ridiculously large Yeti tumbler filled with iced coffee, and I pulled a laminated piece of paper from my pocket and handed it to her over the invisible line of my property. "Good morning, Brenda. I honestly hope your yoga flow was peaceful. That is a copy of Section 9B of the Whispering Pines bylaws. It explicitly states that structural modifications required for the housing, security, and operation of a registered commercial asset under a valid federal license are exempt from the standard architectural review committee, provided they meet municipal building codes." Brenda stared at the paper. Then she stared at the concrete pouring into a massive trench my crew had dug. You don't have a business." "Actually, I do," I said brightly. "Sovereign Feline Education, LLC. But we are actively constructing our primary educational exhibit space." "What kind of business requires 3-foot-deep concrete footers for a home office, Jake?" she sputtered, waving her hands frantically at the mixer. "Are you building a bunker?" "I guess you could call it a bunker, Brenda," I smiled. "It's a specialized containment zone for my business asset, to protect the neighborhood, really." She was furious. She stomped her foot, a literal childish stomp. "You have to submit the plans. I demand to know what kind of animal you are bringing into this community. If it's a horse, Jake, so help me." "It's a rescue cat, Brenda," I replied smoothly. "A feline, for educational purposes." "A cat," she repeated flatly. "You are pouring industrial-grade concrete for a cat. She's a big cat, and she's federally licensed. Have a great day." Brenda!" The rumors started flying faster than a Boca thunderstorm. My neighbors were convinced I was building everything from an underground fighting ring to a doomsday shelter. Gary the dentist parked his golf cart across the street every afternoon and filmed the construction crew welding 12-foot steel mesh panels together. Susan from number 18 called the City Code Enforcement Office 3 times a week. The inspector came out, looked at my permits, looked at my approved, over-engineered blueprints, shrugged, and left. Every time I ran into Brenda at the community mailbox, she would glare at me with unfiltered hatred. 48 hours, Jake, she sneered one afternoon. The construction finishes, the business exemption expires, and we impound the dog. Oh, right, the dog. Honestly, Brenda, I forgot all about him, I chuckled. He's just been sleeping. Good thing I have this business to keep me occupied. 2 weeks later, the enclosure was finished. It was a massive, terrifying cage of steel and concrete, occupying roughly 70% of my backyard. It had a reinforced roof, double-door entry, a massive automatic water trough, and a climbing platform made of treated oak. It looked like a maximum security prison for a very angry dinosaur. And the next day, the USDA inspector arrived. Dr. Evans was a serious woman with a clipboard and absolutely zero sense of humor. She walked the perimeter of the enclosure, rattling the steel mesh, checking the gauge of the wire, inspecting the double-door locks, and reviewing my 40-page protocol for emergency escapes. She looked at the giant warning signs I had legally been required to bolt to the outside. Warning: Apex predator on premises. Class C, exhibitor facility. She signed the form on her clipboard and handed me a copy. Congratulations, Mr. Ibrahim, she said dryly. You have passed the APHIS pre-licensing inspection. Your facility is rated for 1 adult Panthera tigris. A permanent Class C exhibitor's license will be issued to Sovereign Feline Education, LLC, within 10 business days. You are legally authorized to house the animal upon arrival. I shook her hand, practically vibrating with excitement. Thank you, Doctor. It's an honor. I called Marcus at the sanctuary. The paperwork is done. The cage is built. Send the cat. The arrival was scheduled for 3 a.m. This wasn't by accident. It was a carefully negotiated tactical maneuver. When large animal transport is stressful for the animal and highly regulated. You move them at night when the temperature is cooler and the traffic is lighter. And conveniently, when the entire neighborhood is dead asleep. At 2:45 a.m., an unmarked heavy-duty white box truck with specialized ventilation louvers on the sides rumbled onto my street. The air brakes hissed, a sharp, aggressive sound in the stillness of the Boca night. I was standing in the driveway with Marcus and 2 very burly sanctuary handlers carrying tranquilizer rifles. Barnaby was safely locked inside the house, fast asleep on his mat. The truck backed up perfectly, aligning its rear hydraulic liftgate with the newly constructed gated service entrance to my backyard. All right, Jake, Marcus whispered, shining a high-powered flashlight on the clipboard in his hand. Sign the temporary custody transfer. I signed my name, my hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the absolute, unadulterated thrill of what was about to happen. The handlers lowered the liftgate. The air in the back of the truck smelled overwhelmingly musky, a heavy, primal scent of raw meat and dominant predator. A massive reinforced steel transfer crate sat in the middle of the bed. It was dark inside the crate, but I could hear it. It wasn't a meow. It wasn't a purr. It was a low, vibrational hum that seemed to rattle the fillings in my teeth. It was a sound that instinctively triggered the primate part of my brain, telling me to climb a tree immediately. She's awake, Marcus muttered, and she's pissed about the ride. They moved with practiced efficiency. They rolled the transfer crate down the ramp, through the service gate, and attached it directly to the first door of the containment vestibule. They locked it into place, checking every seal. Opening the crate door, Handler 1 called out softly. He pulled the lever. There was a heavy, metallic clack. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. The humid Florida night was dead silent, save for the rhythmic hum of my pool pump. And then She stepped out. Princess Buttercup. She wasn't just a tiger. She was a 400-pound, heavily muscled machine built for murder. Her orange and black stripes rippled over shoulders that looked like engine blocks. She moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, stepping cautiously into the new enclosure. Her massive paws, the size of dinner plates, made almost no sound on the concrete. She turned her head, fixing me with glowing, as amber eyes that held thousands of years of evolutionary superiority. She wasn't an animal you could reason with. She was a force of nature. She padded over to the oak climbing platform, sniffed the automatic waterer, and then turned to face the back of my house. She lifted her massive, blocky head, opened her jaws to expose fangs the size of railroad spikes, and inhaled deeply. Roar. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical impact. The roar tore through the quiet suburban night like a sonic boom, a deep, guttural, earth-shattering explosion of sound that reverberated off the stucco walls of the cul-de-sac. It was so loud it actually hurt my ears. Somewhere down the street, a car alarm immediately started blaring. Then another one. Princess Buttercup paced to the other side of the enclosure, closest to Brenda's property line, and let out a second, even louder, rolling roar. It was a territorial declaration. It sounded like an angry god clearing its throat. Roar. Lights flicked on in the houses around the cul-de-sac. The frantic barking of 20 different small designer dogs erupted simultaneously. Marcus patted me on the shoulder, quickly loading the empty transfer crate back into the truck. Well, she's settled. And she's definitely vocal. Call me on Tuesday for the veterinary check-in. Good luck, man. The truck rumbled away, leaving me alone in my backyard with a Bengal tiger. I stood there for a moment, letting the adrenaline subside. I looked at the giant cat. She looked back at me, let out a massive yawn, and flopped down on the concrete footer, instantly going to sleep. I walked inside, locked the door, and checked my decibel meter app on my phone. And the roar had peaked at a solid 114 decibels. Barnaby was still asleep on his mat. He let out a soft, fluttery wheeze. The next morning was the most glorious day of my life. I set an alarm for 6:45 a.m. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, grabbed my favorite mug, and walked out onto my back patio. The sun was just starting to peek over the palm trees, painting the sky a bruised purple. I sat in my patio chair, perfectly positioned to have a clear view of Brenda's backyard through the slats in my privacy fence. At exactly 7 a.m., the sliding glass door of Brenda's house opened. She stepped out onto her patio, wearing her immaculate white Lululemon set, carrying a steaming green matcha latte in a ceramic mug. She unrolled her pink yoga mat with practiced precision. She took a deep breath of the morning air, closed her eyes, and raised her arms in a graceful arc to begin her sun salutation. Inside the enclosure, Princess Buttercup woke up. She stretched, a slow, languid extension of massive muscles and terrifying claws. She shook her head, padded over to the heavy steel mesh facing Brenda's house, and decided it was time to announce her presence to the territory. Roar! The sound hit Brenda like a physical blow. Her eyes flew open, wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. She shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure terror, and flailed her arms backward. The matcha latte flew into the air, splashing violently across her pristine white patio furniture. She scrambled backward, tripping over her yoga mat, and fell hard onto the concrete. She scrambled back, gasping for air, her eyes wide as saucers, staring at the massive, just striped monster standing casually behind my steel fence. Princess Buttercup let out a low, rumbling chuff, sounding mildly annoyed that someone had dropped a drink near her and then walked back to her water trough. Brenda lay on the ground for a solid 30 seconds, covered in green sludge, completely paralyzed. Then, she scrambled to her feet, abandoning the mug and the mat, and ran back inside her house, slamming the glass door so hard I thought it was going to shatter. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee. Honestly, it tasted incredible. By 8 a.m., the Whispering Pines OA private Facebook group was a digital war zone. I didn't even have to log in to know. My phone was vibrating off the table with notifications from the few neighbors who actually liked me. Susan, Lot 18. Oh my God, did anyone else hear that noise? Gary, Lot 42. I think Jake bought a lion. I am calling the National Guard. Brenda, HOA President. Do not panic. I am handling this. The authorities have been dispatched. Oh, she was handling this. I couldn't wait. I went inside, fed Barnaby his breakfast, and pulled a massive 3-inch D-ring binder out of my home office. I walked back out to the front porch, set the binder on the small patio table next to my sleeping bulldog, and waited. It didn't take long. At 8:35 a.m., the cavalry arrived. It wasn't just Brenda. It was an entire municipal task force. 2 Boca Raton police cruisers pulled aggressively onto my driveway, their tires squealing on the pristine concrete. Right behind them was a white van marked Animal Care and Control, and behind that, a municipal sedan carrying the chief code enforcement officer for the district. Brenda burst out of her front door and sprinted down the sidewalk, her hair wet from a frantic shower, still looking slightly green around the edges from the matcha incident. She was pointing at my house with the frantic energy of a woman who had just witnessed a UFO landing. "Arrest him!" Brenda screamed at the top of her lungs, ignoring the officers getting out of their vehicles and storming directly onto my porch. "Arrest him right now! He is harboring a jungle beast. It's a violation of the exotic pet ban. It's a danger to the community. It almost killed me this morning." I didn't stand up. I stayed seated, legs crossed, sipping my coffee. "Good morning, Brenda." "Good morning, officers," I said calmly. "Can I help you all with something?" The taller officer, it was Higgins again, Denise looking significantly more awake and considerably more stressed, stepped forward, his hand resting cautiously on his utility belt. "Mr. Ibrahim, we received a frantic 911 call from Mrs. Vance here, stating you have a lion in your backyard." "A tiger," Brenda corrected hysterically. "It's a huge man-eating tiger. It roared at me. It's a violation of Section 4A of the Covenants." Higgins looked at me. "Sir, please tell me you don't have a tiger in your backyard." "Well, Officer Higgins," I said, setting my mug down. "I don't have a pet tiger, no. I do, however, have a commercial educational asset temporarily housed on my property." The animal control officer, a burly guy with thick gloves hooked to his belt, stepped up next to Higgins. "Sir, it doesn't matter what you call it. Boca Raton City Ordinance prohibits the keeping of Class 1 wildlife within residential city limits without specific state and federal permitting." "Oh, absolutely," I agreed, nodding enthusiastically. "You are completely correct, which is why I am fully compliant with all state and federal regulations." I reached for the massive binder. I flipped it open with a satisfying thwack. "What is that?" Brenda sneered, leaning over the table. "More of your fake legal garbage? You can't loophole your way out of a tiger, Jake." "Actually, Brenda, I can," I said, pulling out the first document. "This is my active business license from the state of Florida for Sovereign Feline Education, LLC." I handed it to the code enforcement officer. I pulled out the second document. "This is the structural engineering approval and municipal building permit for a Category 3 containment facility signed by your office last week." I handed that to him as well. Then I pulled out the Holy Grail, the final, beautiful piece of paper with the official seal of the United States Department of Agriculture. "And this," I said, holding it up so the morning sun caught the official watermark, "is my active, fully approved USDA Class C exhibitor's license, issued under the Animal Welfare Act. My backyard is officially a federally recognized, inspected, and licensed commercial exhibition facility." The animal control officer took the paper. He read it once. He read it twice. He looked at Higgins. It's real. He's got a Class C." "It doesn't matter," Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking. "The HOA covenants explicitly ban exotic pets. Section 4A. "She's right, officers," I said, turning to a different section of the binder. "Section 4A does ban exotic pets. However," I pulled out a copy of the Whispering Pines bylaws and highlighted a specific paragraph in bright yellow marker. Section 9B, which Brenda herself authored and aggressively enforced to protect her multi-level marketing essential oil scheme, clearly states, "The association shall levy no fines, restrictions, or impoundment threats against registered home-based businesses, their inventory, or their commercial assets, provided said business operates under a valid state or federal license." I slid the highlighted page across the table to Brenda. "Princess Buttercup is not a pet, Brenda," I said softly, looking her dead in the eye. "She is a federally licensed commercial asset belonging to Sovereign Feline Education, LLC. She is strictly exempt from all residential nuisance clauses." The silence on the porch was deafening. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic wheezing of Barnaby, sleeping peacefully at my feet. Officer Higgins took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and turned to look at the massive steel enclosure visible over my side fence. He then turned back to Brenda. "Mrs. Vance," Higgins said, his voice flat and completely devoid of emotion, "this man is operating a federally licensed commercial enterprise. His facility passed municipal inspection. His paperwork is in order. This is a civil dispute regarding an HOA bylaw interpretation, and honestly, it looks like his interpretation is airtight. We are leaving." "You can't leave," Brenda gasped, it clutching her chest. "It roared at me. It's a noise violation." "Ma'am," Higgins sighed, stepping off the porch, "it's a federally licensed commercial asset. It's allowed to make noise. Have a nice day." The police cruisers pulled away. The animal control van pulled away. The code enforcement officer tipped his hat to me and walked back to his sedan. Brenda stood on my porch, completely alone, shaking with impotent rage. She looked at the binder, then looked at me. "You did this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You brought a monster into this neighborhood just to spite me." "No, Brenda," I replied, standing up and picking up my sleeping bulldog. "I brought an educational asset into this neighborhood because you threatened to impound an elderly dog for breathing too loudly. I just thought, honestly, as the neighborhood needed a little perspective on what real noise sounds like." Right on cue, as if she possessed perfect comedic timing, Princess Buttercup let out another earth-shattering roar from the backyard. Brenda flinched, dropped her clipboard, and ran back to her house. The next few months were, in a word, beautiful. Barnaby slept peacefully on the porch every single day, his soft snores completely drowning out by the occasional neighborhood-shaking roar of a 400-pound apex predator. Brenda never once measured his decibel levels again. In fact, Brenda barely left her house. I leaned fully into the malicious compliance. Since I had a Class C license, I was legally required to exhibit the animal. So, I set up a webcam in the enclosure and started a YouTube live stream called Sovereign Feline Education. I talked about tiger conservation, the importance of proper enclosure construction, and the absolute necessity of understanding local and federal zoning laws. The stream blew up. People tuned in by the thousands to watch a massive tiger sleep on an oak platform in a suburban Boca Raton backyard. I monetized the channel, set up a Patreon, and started making thousands of dollars a month, all of which I donated back to Marcus's sanctuary to help build their new wing. I was literally funding tiger conservation with the sheer, unadulterated stress of my HOA president. The irony was not lost on me. Brenda tried to call emergency board meetings to amend the bylaws, but you can't retroactively enforce a new bylaw against an existing federal business. Her hands were tied. Her sanctuary was ruined. Every time she tried to do yoga or host a garden party or yell at a neighbor about their grass length, Princess Buttercup would let out a territorial roar that sent everyone scattering. 3 months into the lease, a for sale sign went up in Brenda's front yard. She couldn't take it anymore. She sold the house at a slight loss and moved to a gated community in Naples, presumably to start terrorizing a whole new group of people. 6 months later, Marcus called me. The new wing at the sanctuary was finished, and Princess Buttercup was ready to come home to a permanent, multi-acre habitat. I watched the transport truck pull away with a strange sense of melancholy. I was going to miss the big cat. But I wasn't going to miss the massive food bills, and Barnaby frankly deserved his quiet naps back. I kept the enclosure, of course. It's an incredible conversation starter. And more importantly, it remains a permanent Category 3 monument to the lengths a petty man will go to protect his dog. So remember this, folks. The next time someone tries to use a set of arbitrary rules to bully you, to threaten your peace, or to come after something you love, don't get mad. Get compliant. Read the fine print, find the loophole, and remind them that whatever small, insignificant noise they're complaining about, it could always, always be significantly louder. Stay sovereign, and honestly, keep checking those bylaws.